It gives me the greatest pleasure to tell you that this class is being broadcast to the world. So we're a show. So really, carefully consider your questions today. Everything is on the record. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jack Bernard, who is part of the General Counsel's office here. I always think that it's a good idea to have a lawyer in your corner, and Jack is our lawyer. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jack so you have the maximum amount of time.
Great. Thanks. Good morning. As Vic said, my name is Jack Bernard, and I'm a lawyer for the university. I also teach in a bunch of our schools and colleges here, including this one from time to time. It's amazing to me that in a classroom with so few people, you all still migrate towards the back. Yeah, well, the camera's on me. And I'm going to do my best to actually keep the camera off me, since I tend to move around a lot, and yeah, which makes me feel a little bit bad for the poor guy in the back who's having to operate the camera. But can you see the slides all right? I realize it's bright in here, but okay, great. So today we're gonna. I know you had a chance to talk with Melissa Levine last week about a little bit about copyright-related issues and the work that they're doing to identify copyrighted works. Is it the custom in this class to attempt to embarrass people who walk in late? Yes. Okay. And so I know she was here talking with you last week, so I'm sorry if some of this will be repeating some of the things that she said, but my hope is that it isn't. What I'm going to do with you today is talk with you a little bit about the partnership that the university has with Google, the Google Corporation, and about how copyright works and about how the HathiTrust works at the university, and hopefully how those two things blend. Our relationship with Google along these lines started back in 2002, and it's really been a fantastic ride. It's been most of my waking hours since that time, working for the university, despite all of the other things that I get to do for the university. And so I hope that we'll have a chance to explore what it means for the world to digitize all these books and what the promise is of that project. So you're all familiar with Google as a company, I'm sure. The first time I met with people from Google, it was a smaller number than the people in this room, but they were dressed just the way that you are, very casually. I walked into the room, and I was in my 30s at the time, and I was the oldest person in the room, and there I was facing these sneakered multimillionaires, and to talk a little bit about the idea behind the Google Book Search project. Google is a completely different company since that time. Originally, when I spoke with them, they had 5 attorneys in-house. Now they have well over 100. I actually think it's over 150 now. And although my numbers might be off there, but they have a lot of attorneys who work for them now. They've become a very complicated, enormous organization. It's been fun to kind of watch them change during this process, going from being very small with this interesting idea for a website, and you have to think these were students like you who developed this company that has dramatically changed the world in a very, very short period of time. Things are different because of choices made by a company, and not exclusively by that company, but by their intrepid spirit to try to do new and interesting things using the internet. And you may prefer Google or their competitors for your basic search, but there's no doubt that search has not been the same since Google came along. Well, back in 2002, we started talking about this idea that Google would digitize our library, that they would take every book in our library and put it in a digital format. And you can imagine the kind of response to that if you consider what that really means. I mean, we have over 8 million volumes. The process of doing that was extraordinary, but it resulted in consequences. There was all of this immediate. Once the project was announced in 2004, there was immediate pushback, and Google and the university took some heat. Originally, Google a little bit more than the university, but there was just a focus on this idea that Google would be digitizing all these works, putting them on the web in one way or another, and returning copies of those books to the libraries that had lent the books to Google. It was all in search of this original project called Book Search, Google Book Search, and I have the beta screen here because I remember very fondly when we got the beta up, when the beta was available, and you could actually start searching inside all of these books. The concept was pretty simple. It was, we've become accustomed to searching online for things. The first time I saw a search engine work was at the university here. The first time I saw it really publicly work, I guess I had seen Mosaic was the first browser that I worked with, and I saw Jim Duderstadt, who was then the president of the university, trying to encourage people to take an interest in this computing technology for the future. And he did a talk at the dental school to try to say, look, technology is important. You're going to have to think about technology. The president was out there pushing technology. And he said, let me show you how amazing this is. And he, using Mosaic in a big room, he had a screen just like the screen here. And he said to the dental faculty and staff, we should have competence in how to use these technologies. Let me show you how great they are. He said, give me a search term. Give me a search term, any search term you'd like. And someone raised her hand and said, dental, search for dental. So he searched for dental. And the first thing to come up was a site that he clicked, and it turned out to be a demonstration about how to use a dental dam, which is a contraceptive device. And these were very provocative pictures. So the dental school was immediately interested in technology. So search, we're all familiar with it. We understand why it's valuable to us. This idea of taking search over things that were born digital seemed pretty easy. The World Wide Web, the whole intention of the web was for the information to be discovered, for people to be able to communicate with each other effectively, to get information out there, and now the university and Google thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could search over all of these books as well, that you weren't going to only be able to search for things that were new, but also for things that were old, or things that were the kinds of works that are traditionally created by and lauded by the academy. I mean, the book is the primary, one of the two primary forms of scholarship, the other being the works that are published in journals. Many journals were already available in an electronic format. Some weren't, so those could get digitized too. But the idea was we would search over these books to be able to mine the information that was inside them, because there was plenty there we weren't going to be able to find. And so the search engine looked pretty similar to what we're accustomed to, and it looks a little different now, but it's this kind of opportunity to put something in and you'd end up with search results that look something just like this. The idea being that you could click on a link and get more information about a book. Nothing atypical here. In fact, the whole idea was that the experience would be very similar to what people were accustomed to. And there were concerns at first, would books always show up in your search? Or because would they displace a website? Google was struggled at first to figure out how they were going to manage people's expectations around books. Or would books be something separate, or could you set your browser so that books would be a part of the normal search or not? At first, with Book Search, the books came all at the bottom. There was a hint at the top when they were trying to promote the program. There was a hint at the top, but at the bottom of every screen you could see books. Now you can just go to the books function and search through books, but you can also, I believe, set your browser so you can search over books and web pages at the same time. But these are the kinds of results you'd get, and there's a clue in these images as to how much information you might get from the book. So Google had 3 views in mind of its books. The first view being full view. And what full view let you do is it let you actually look at the entire book. These books almost exclusively are works that were in the public domain, which means that there's no copyright protection for those works any longer. And what was fantastic about this is you'd be able to see, for instance, a table of contents, and the table of contents itself was a link, or the index in the book. Each, they were linked, so you could move around the book as quickly as you could by just clicking a link. But because these works were in the public domain, we would be able to see them, the entire work. Of course, the challenge was determining, and you learned a little bit about this in your last class, exactly what is in the public domain. Not always an easy definition. Google took a fairly conservative perspective on what was in the public domain. They wanted to make sure that they weren't going to mistakenly put a book that was not in the public domain into full view, because the risk for them, of course, was copyright infringement. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that was the case in just a few minutes. But so this is wonderful. This is millions of books right here that went from sitting on library shelves to being available to the entire planet. Now, that probably overstates it a little bit, because it's possible that there are differences in copyright law depending upon where you're coming from. And so Google had to shape its ability to show materials based on what country, the country that was making the request to see a particular page. But overwhelmingly, if a work is available here, it's available everywhere, at least in Google's platform. And so a wonderful, wonderful contribution to humanity to be able to search these books and find them. The next view, this is the sample pages view, and all of the books here, these are books where Google entered into a partnership with with publishers. Thousands of publishers Google has relationships with now. And the publisher relationship enables Google to show portions of in-copyright works, up to, say, 20% typically. Sometimes it was less, sometimes it was more. But the idea was for you to be able to get a teaser. And typically you'd be able to see something related to your search, but if not, you'd still get to see portions of the book to make a determination about whether or not that book was going to be useful to you. So these are works where Google has entered into a relationship with the publisher or the author of the book to authorize Google's use. Certainly no problems there. So these first 2 categories, either there's no copyright protection or there's permission from the rights holder. It's the third category that's the challenge. And the third category is the vast majority of works that are not in the public domain, or at least haven't yet been determined to have been in the public domain, and where Google doesn't have a relationship with the publisher. So in this category, what Google decided was that it would show 3 snippets based on your search of the works. And what's interesting is how much effort they put into getting this right. So anyone, anywhere who typed in a search, that search was logged. And every unique search only showed the same 3 snippets. So if you searched for, quote, Abraham Lincoln's nose, unquote, you would find all of the instances of that particular phrase inside the database, the collection of digitized works. But for each book, you would only see the same 3 snippets, even if Abraham Lincoln's nose appeared multiple times, many more than 3 times in a particular work. The idea was to make it more difficult for somebody to reassemble the book. Now granted, trying to assemble a book based on snippets like this would take an extraordinary amount of energy, and oftentimes it's just much easier to borrow the book from the library or to buy the book. And there really isn't a lot of evidence that people actually went to the effort of doing this. But Google was concerned. They wanted to make sure that there was going to be no easy way to do this, even if I suppose it's technically possible. to reassemble the book this way. But not easy, given the books we're talking about. So the snippet view just showed you a few lines of text around the search to give you some sense of the context. Something that's worth noting, too, is that excluded from this view were books where the text, where a snippet would be harmful. So a book of haiku, or a dictionary of some kind, where actually searching for the term might result in you seeing the whole entry. This would be harmful. And so these kinds of works were not made available through Google. But what you need to know about these works is that there's no relationship with the publisher or author, not likely to be one either for the bulk of them, and they are not yet in the public domain. So there were these two projects, right? There's the Partner Project and the Library Project, and the Partner Project is about books that are currently in print. And as Melissa talked with you last week, I'm sure, making a determination about exactly what is in print is not the easiest thing to do. And the Library Project, well, that was just taking the books from our shelves and the shelves of other libraries. And both of them became Google Book Search. What's interesting is that Google's plaintiffs, the people who sued Google for this project, they were just fine with the partner program. That is, because it was negotiated. You went and got our permission. They didn't like the library program because they felt that if you don't ask our permission, you're not allowed to use our books. Simple as that. In fact, even if they aren't our books, you're just not allowed to use somebody's books because you need to ask for permission. This is the perspective of the publishing industry, of the authors' organizations. They're really concerned about these rights. And certainly the rights we're talking about and the rights we're going to talk about are very important rights. With respect to the publishers, even the publishers who sued Google were on the list of Google's partners. They were happy with that partner program. And like I said, Google has relationships with thousands of publishers. Why would a publisher even want to partner with Google at all, do you suppose? Yeah, right, because there's money. Why is there money? Why is there money in it? I mean, where's the money in partnering with Google? What do you guys think? Yeah. Exposure, okay. So the book will be found, right? Someone might actually buy the book if they do a search. And of course, this is Google's business, right? The exposure business. And despite their initial objections and publishers sort of trickling into this, it became an explosive relationship that Google had with these publishers, and a very productive one, and has resulted in many, many, many sales for publishers and for authors. It's fantastic, and it's exactly what we want. I think no one objects to the idea that someone is able to find something and then have the opportunity to buy it. That's not the problem with this relationship. The challenge is, so you've got all of these works that are in the public domain. So we're going to say about 20% of the works we can determine to be in the public domain in the typical library. This is probably an underestimation, but it takes effort to figure out the copyright status of a book. And you're doing it on a book-by-book basis. It can be very expensive to do that. But using a simple metric, like the date 1922 and before, we're able to identify that roughly 20% of the books are in the public domain in the typical academic library's collection. Or at least the great academic libraries collections, the libraries that have millions of books, like Michigan and Stanford and Harvard and whatnot. Books in print in our library, roughly about 5%. That's true for most libraries. We're constantly acquiring new books, so the libraries have an influx of new works, and we try to buy as many books as we can in our libraries. At the same time, some books stay in print. They're just important works that have stood the test of time. The abundance of works go out of print within a year. There are no more print runs of those works. Once that print run is done, then there will be no further print run. That's the overwhelming majority of books have a single print run and do not sell again. and then you can find them in the used market. The libraries who acquired those kinds of books are the great academic libraries, particularly if they're about recondite academic subject matter. So here's 25%. That means the vast 75%, and again, these are just rough numbers, but this represents this group of books where we just don't know the status of that work. We assume it's protected by copyright, but we don't know who the copyright holder is necessarily, and reaching that person is not easy. So here in this group, the public domain group, we don't have to talk to anyone. In the in-print group, if we want to use these works, if Google wanted to use those works, they would contact the rights holder to be able to get that expanded use. But for these, it's sort of the mystery land. And this is wherein the lawsuit against Google and then the eventual lawsuit against libraries, like the University of Michigan Library, is born. It's born of these books in the middle, the snippet view books. So the original Google Books project was that Google would go to the libraries, first the University of Michigan Library, and would take books and digitize the books from our libraries. And what they did is, as the plaintiffs in our case were so happy to point out, they literally drove trucks over to the library, and on those trucks, many, many, many trucks, were loaded books, shelf by shelf by shelf, in these little library carts that you're familiar with that can take an entire 6 shelves of books at the same time. These carts were loaded onto a truck. They were brought to a large facility and digitized page by page, single page by single page. Those books were digitized very quickly by well-trained people and then returned to the library. And then what would happen is those books were usually returned within about 2 weeks. So you borrow books longer than Google did. And Google got through them a lot faster than you do. If you get through them at all. So then Google would return the book to us, and after putting the digitized book through a process, they would make those books available to the libraries so that the libraries could get a digital copy of the book back. That was part of the deal with Google. If you want to digitize our books, you need to enable us to have a digital copy. You need to give us a digital copy of the book too, because we have a need to have a digital copy. This process, as we talked about, enabled the books to be searchable and displayed online. Tremendous value for the original book search project for Google. And it led to sales and partnerships, and I think Google was very happy with the trajectory it was headed in. Given all of that kind of chaos around Google and involving Google, you might ask yourself, why would the university want to do this in the first place? Why partner with Google? I mean, think about it this way. If we should think about risk. I think there's, a couple of ways to think about risk. And along the x-axis here, think about this risk as the risk that you are engaging in copyright infringement. So, sorry, I know there's a camera here. So copyright infringement, right? The closer you are to the origin, the less likely it is that you're a copyright infringer. The farther you are from the origin, the more likely it is that you're a copyright infringer. So if you want to avoid risk along this axis, you would try to be closer to the origin. You would engage in activities that are less likely to be copyright infringement. So this project involves digitizing millions of books, every single page in those books, including books that are protected by copyright. So you can imagine that at least the initial thoughts of people are that this is a pretty risky project along the x-axis. Along the y-axis, when you think about risk, it's all the other kinds of risk, other risk. So the other risk axis is, how likely is this to draw attention? How likely are people to know about what you're doing. Now, don't take me to be saying that anyone should feel comfortable engaging in infringing activity just because no one will know about it. That is not the message I want to give you here at all. What I am trying to say to you, though, is that when you think about risk, when you think about the overall risk you're engaging in, you have to take into consideration other factors. So, for instance, if you're going to use a Disney image, you need to be aware that Disney is very aggressive in protecting its images. And so no matter how tame your use is, you should expect some transaction costs, because Disney is going to aggressively pursue its rights, even if it pursues your rights in the process. So along the y-axis, there's risk with Disney. Well, Google is similar. Google is a lightning rod for attention, and so partnering with Google means there's risk. So along the y-axis, the university knows there's going to be risk in this process. Along the x-axis, the university at least assumes that there is perceived risk, and we'll talk about that. Now, I will tell you that as the lawyer who advised the university on this, I can say that our acts were completely lawful throughout the process. They were carefully manicured to stay within the rights that are given to us by Congress. And Google's attorneys, I think, came to a similar conclusion for Google, as did the attorneys for the various libraries who participated. But the perception is very, very different than reality. And that is why lawsuits happen. Differences of perception about how the law really works. Okay, so why would the university do this? Well, there are all of the benefits from the Google project itself. I mean, even if the library never got a copy and had no interaction with Google afterwards, the idea that the public would be able to search over these works and find books, valuable information inside books, would be a wonderful thing, a gift to the world. The idea that our libraries would, make their works accessible to the world, and we would discover new things. How wonderful that is. But we had our own benefits in mind, too. First, we were going to be able to preserve the collection, and I can't emphasize to you how important preservation is to the library world. The idea that these works that we have been curating for a couple of centuries, some of us, that they will not disappear and be gone. One harkens back to the story of the Library of Alexandria. The idea that the knowledge of portions of the knowledge of the world are destroyed either through fire or flood or other kinds of incident, riot, war, any sort of thing like that. Moreover, our books they're fragile. They seem so hardy, but they are not permanent artifacts. You know used bookstores, when you go inside, you know that smell inside the used bookstore, that familiar smell? We all kind of like that smell now. We don't get it as much. There just aren't as many bookstores. But it's very different than a new bookstore, that used bookstore smell. What you are smelling is book death. You are literally inhaling the particulate matter of the disintegrating books, the moldering books. The books can't help it. You know, when they're exposed to the moisture in the air and the oxygen, they start to fall apart. Most of the books in our collections are not printed on acid-free paper. The paper is acidic, and so the book literally eats itself up. And I have opened a book and had it turn into what librarians call cornflakes, right? It just starts to crumble. What a horrible thing if you think about it. I mean, the works in our collections, these are not works that everybody bought. They're not the books that everyone has on a shelf. In fact, there are times we're one of very few entities to have purchased a work. And think about what that means, the idea that we would preserve very rare works and on top of that, make them searchable. Imagine what we might discover. I don't know, take for instance something like To Kill a Mockingbird. Here we have a book that is, you all read, or I'm assuming all have read, in school, right? An American classic by Harper Lee. You would think that Harper Lee, given the popularity of that book and the importance of that book, would have written dozens of books, but she just wrote the one book. That's it. One book in a lifetime. It was a good one, right? One-hit wonder for authors. But this book did not actually come about all that easily. She had tried to produce that book the first time that she submitted it to publishing houses, and it was rejected. A few copies were made. They were distributed for assessment purposes, kind of like a focus group. People read it, and they just didn't care for it. And so they sent it back to her saying, we're not interested. But there were those few copies that were made. And Harper Lee was fortunate to have resources, connections. I don't know the answer to this, but there's speculation that Truman Capote actually helped her write the second iteration of the work. Whether or not that's true, we ended up with that work. But she got a second bite at the apple. And so now there are many, many, many copies of that book. But imagine if she was like most women of her era, or people of color, or immigrants, or people of minority religions, or people with disabilities, just the disenfranchised who didn't have the power to actually get a second bite at the apple. We may have those works in our collections, the works that had very, very limited testing print runs in poor quality, so that someone could sample to decide whether or not we would publish those works. The only places that bought those copies were places like academic libraries that saw an interest, research libraries. Who knows what we'll discover by accident, the next great work of American literature by some disenfranchised voice that's sitting in the collection right now, these lost gems and beauties that are buried that you've never heard of and I've never heard of, but one day you might discover when you're doing a search about something completely different. But it could be beautiful and sitting in there. And I think it's only a matter of time before we start discovering those from these great libraries that exist. And there are libraries that have unique works. There are libraries that have works where there were just 2 or 3 in libraries. And these will be embodied in this digital collection. So it's of tremendous importance to preserve them, to preserve the content in them, and to enable them to be discovered. It also, for libraries, improves their ability to curate their books, to know what's in the collection. If you think about the typical bibliography in a book or the library record, I mean, you may remember going to a card catalog, some of you. I remember the day they removed the card catalogs from the graduate library here, and there was a faculty member bemoaning the fact that that they were going to be gone, that he was not going to be able to do his research in the way that he was accustomed to doing it. He stood in front of the card catalog when they were bringing this kind of forklifty device to move it. It made me think of the lone Chinese citizen standing in front of those tanks. And they had to persuade. He was yelling and very upset. And I did see him a year later using Merlin in the library. And but the idea that we can curate our collections in a more sophisticated way, the data on those cards, or even the data in the Merlin record, is very limited. And for the sophisticated kind of work we do in the Academy, this enables us to have a great deal more of information about the works. Because they're digitized, we can run algorithms across the works and actually cull more information. It also allows us to work together, like we do in the Hathi Trust. The Hathi Trust is a service of the University of Michigan. Essentially, it's a space created by the University of Michigan where now somewhere over 80 libraries are working together to create a vision for a notion of shared curation, the idea that we'll understand what we all have as far as collections go and can make decisions collectively to ensure that the works don't disappear, that actually the artifacts that are most imperiled get the greatest resources to preserve the artifact, and so that not every library is having to preserve the same works, but we're working as a federation to make sure that the artifacts don't disappear, and because we know we've preserved the knowledge, we also think there's value, imagine that, libraries, in the book itself. But sharing this responsibility, working together, has tremendous value for us. Also, from the beginning, it has been a part of this project to enable our users who have print disabilities to have access to the works, to be able to have the same experience that most other patrons have when they enter the library, the ability to browse, the ability to get works immediately, the ability to select from among a group of works. What happened previously, before there was digitization, is that our patrons who had print disabilities, and when I say print disabilities, by the way, I'm referring to a disability that makes it difficult or impossible to use a book in the printed format, either because your vision won't let you read the book, or lack of vision won't let you read the book, or because you can't manipulate the book, because you can't turn pages or hold a book. There are a variety of mobility impairments or the absence of particular limbs that won't let you do that. Certain disabilities won't let you keep still enough to actually be able to read a book because of your head movements. So there are a variety of disabilities that make accessing the book difficult. The objective was to give equal access to the library that we give to folks who don't have disabilities. What happened beforehand was that typically the books would either be converted into Braille format for blind readers who could read Braille, and that's not true for all blind people or visually impaired people for that matter, and or to put the books on audio recording. Well, you can imagine that it took months and months. Think about your own behavior in a term when you are preparing to write a paper. Think about how long you wait, and then what your experience is like at the library. If you're anything like I was, I would start my effort too late, given the amount of work I had. I had a lot of things happening at the same time. And then I would go to the library and I would search for works that I thought would help me to write my paper. And I would take home with me many, many more books than I actually used in the end. Because what I think, okay, I can't do all this here, or maybe I would do it at the library. I'd pull them from the shelves and I'd cull through the books to decide which ones were going to be most helpful to me. Well, if you're a person who can't get access to a library book for months because it is being read, you don't even know if you want the book yet, if the book will be useful to you yet, but you can't browse the book because it's not in a format that enables you to make that decision. All you get is the information on the library card catalog to tell you something about that book. So imagine going and having to wait 3 months to get several books put into a format so that you can decide whether or not you will use them in a term paper. And magnify that over doing a dissertation or over conducting academic research if you're a faculty member. Just imagine the amount of time it could take. This even took a long time when we got to the digital era and started digitizing books. Unlike new books, where for instance, a textbook, if you had a textbook for a class, you could go to the Services for Students with Disabilities office, and they would saw off the back of the book that you bought with a saw and put it into a high-speed scanner and return to you a book bound, the book you bought bound, and then with a disc, and you would have a copy of your book so that you could access it in a format that was acceptable to you, that would enable you to have access to this book. How wonderful that was. That didn't take, that no longer took so long for your textbooks. But for books in the library, we don't cut the backs off the books in the library. And most of the books in the library, you can't go out and buy a new copy because it's not in print anymore. There's no place to buy a new copy of that book. So the digitization process there took a really long time. And our digitization process was nothing like Google's process. I should have mentioned this when we were talking about preservation, but before Google came along, the University of Michigan Library was the most aggressive digitizer of books of any academic library. We digitize books at the highest rate, averaging about 5,000 books a year. 5,000 books, amazing, 5,000 books. Our highest year was close to 10,000 books in that year. and that was with a tremendous effort. Google purported to digitize our whole library in 6 years. It would have taken us 1,000 years to digitize as quickly as Google did. Google now has something like 20 million digital books in its collection, which is significantly more than the 11 million in the HathiTrust. But lots of Google's books also come directly from publishers through those partner agreements. So they're getting a book that was born digital and given to them in digital format. But we have this huge collection of these digitized books now that we never would have had otherwise. Yeah, imagine that, 1,000 years, and just do the math, and you'll see that I'm correct there. So Google was able to enable us to transform how we digitize books. And for patrons with print disabilities, I can't overemphasize how important this was. The National Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped has 25,000 popular books in digital format. 25,000 popular books. And that's great if you just want to read popular books. We have 11 million books in a digital format that are made available to our patrons who have print disabilities immediately, just like your typical experience going into the library. You can get what you want when you need it immediately and have immediate access, the ability to browse. This is a transformative experience, and for students and faculty who have disabilities, nothing could be more powerful for their experience at the university. Digital formats make new research possible. The kinds of research that you all think about at SI, the kinds of algorithms people are able to develop to run over the database is phenomenal. Whether it's understanding more about the development of language or translation technologies, to looking at maybe the kinds of words people used or the development of certain technologies, whether it's finding things that you could not have found otherwise absent luck. So take the average genealogist who just wants to find out something about his or her family. This is a very simple, approachable research. Most books do not identify, even in well-indexed books, every person inside the book. It'd be nice if they did, but sometimes someone's just mentioned once. They're a small, maybe unimportant figure who just happens to be a relative. You're trying to piece together things. Margaret Leary over at the law library, who used to be the law librarian, she talked about doing research on James Cook and said that once we had digitized the books and she was able to access them through HathiTrust and Google, it enabled her to find things about Cook's life, his experiences, people's comments on him that she never could have found by any other means. And this is a seasoned librarian, somebody who has spent her entire life entire professional life doing research, and someone who has dedicated a significant portion of that to doing research on one person. She said it exploded what she was able to find. And that's just one person. So for all of us, it's just tremendous research opportunities. Who knows what's coming next? We have scholars here at Michigan who are doing interesting research in how to summarize a book. Could you create an abstract of a book, an accurate abstract of a book, by running an algorithm over it so it would cull the story and be able to tell you enough of what you want to know about the book, but not so much that you know whether or not the butler did it. And we have people here doing this kind of research, and you need a robust pool of works. And so it's very exciting for the Academy and for the world when you consider what might be discoverable. In the litigation against the university for operating the HathiTrust, we have some scholars who wrote amicus briefs. An amicus brief is a friend of the court brief. It's someone who says, court, you should take into consideration the interests of a group I represent because I have a perspective on the case. And we ended up with 13 amici coming in on our side in the case. And 2 of those were centers for academic research that talked about what they were able to find because they could search over the Hathi Trust. As an example, there's a public health group that's looking at the transmission of various diseases. And it turns out we have to understand something about how diseases spread across cultures 150 years ago in order to deal with strains that are resistant to the medications that we have today of certain kinds of diseases. And understanding how people talked about responding to that transmission of disease from long ago helps us think about how we might battle it today. They said they never would have found the information they were looking for absent being able to search inside books where people gave accounts of how little villages and towns dealt with the spread of disease. And it's affecting our ability to deal with those kinds of problems, similar problems today. Or beekeeping. We discovered this amazing information. This is prior to Google, but we had digitized these journals from the 1800s. And inside one of those journals was an article talking about the keeping bees, keeping an apiary. And as you know, bees are imperiled right now. Well, someone found that through a search, and it's actually improved this old knowledge which was lost has come back, and apiaries around the country and around the world are now benefiting from having discovered this old knowledge. As I tell my kids, people were no stupider 100 years ago. You know, they were just as smart as we are today. They had less access to our culture and our technology, but they were still quite smart. And there is a lot of forgotten knowledge out there. And projects like this enable us to rediscover that knowledge, which may indeed be very helpful for the future. Another thing we were able to do was to partner with other libraries like we do in the Hathi Trust. I gave you some examples of where those partnerships were helpful in terms of curating works collectively, but also the Hathi Trust enables us to store all of these digital works in one place with a higher level of security than we might be able to individually bring to bear. So with 80 libraries, and one day it'll be many more than that, contributing resources to the idea that we have this facility that protects the works, that makes sure that we don't lose bits from the works. You know, the digital copies can also decay. The bits fall out, and we have mechanisms for making sure that if a bit falls out, we put it back in again. Much easier to replace a digital bit in a book than a bit of the book that has the hard copy book that has actually disappeared or fallen out or been poked through, say, by my child. Much easier to repair those books in a digital format. So we may not have the book itself, but we have the content. And the Hathi Trust has as its primary mission to preserve works, to make them accessible to people who have print disabilities, to enable research, and to enable this efficient curation. So what you are seeing above this line here is really all that the Hathi Trust is embodied to do. And again, it's this collection of over 80 libraries operating in this service space provided by the University of Michigan. I guess it's important to mention the public domain and the idea that we're actually enabling people to access it. If you think about these public domain books in our library, they're very accessible to you. You can walk in there and get them. How nice it is today that we can actually enable the world to have access to the public domain immediately. There's no protection for those works. So it achieves an important purpose for us to actually enable the public to access those works. We also enable our library to be accessible to the world in new ways. It's funny when you think about it. Our first library and set of library books, they weren't available to anybody. Only the regents of the university had access to those books. And then after a time, and at that time we had many more regents than we do today, but they could access the books, the faculty could not access the books, the students could not access the books. The regents could get supervised access to the library books because the books were so important. It wasn't easy to create books. They didn't have the ubiquity that they had today. Well, then eventually we let the faculty have access to books. Again, supervised access. So a faculty member could sit in the library and read a book with the assistance of a librarian. And eventually, faculty were able to view books on their own, and finally students got to have some access to books, again, supervised access to a very limited set of books in limited circumstances. And then slowly but surely, students became the primary users of books as well as faculty. There was unsupervised access, and we migrated to a system where the library was open 24 hours, and now we've put our entire collection online to be searched and discovered by people. The public domain books are accessible. The books that are protected by copyright, you can find out the book that you want, even if you can't access it immediately yet in the digital format. Maybe one day. I know Vic wants to talk about that a little later on, and we can. But the library is now open to the world. So we went from it being this cloistered, protected place to being something that's very open. We want people to discover that knowledge. So these are the primary reasons why we would enter into this kind of relationship. So I think it's compelling. I hope you think it's compelling. But you still might ask yourself, there are lots of compelling things in the world, things that are worth doing, that you're just not allowed to do. And the idea of digitizing millions of books and partnering with Google and enabling people to search and do research and letting people with print disabilities access the book and creating this HathiTrust thing, all of this sounds very much like you're trammeling someone's rights. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we're able to do that. Oh, all right, so I just see an error in this slide. Anyone see the error? There's a mistake in here. That's amazing. That's the first time I've ever heard that. Congratulations. And in honor of you, I'll just move it ahead to the next slide. There we go. Yeah, normally no one says that. That's fantastic. But one thing you'll also notice that changed, if you look down here, down at the Jack Bernard here, you'll see I added a 2013. This is how most of us think about copyright, actually. It's the interaction we have. It's a copyright notice. And this is roughly a proper copyright notice. You either want the word copyright or the little indicia here of copyright, a date and a name. Frequently it'll say by in here, 2013 by Jack Bernard. But this is how we tend to interact with copyright, how the public interacts with copyright. They've seen these notices many times. Every book they've opened, anytime they look at a movie or watch television even, they can see this notice everywhere. It's become familiar. It's so familiar we don't even pay that much attention to it. But there it is. It's looming in the backs of our heads. So I want to introduce you to the subject matter by starting with the place where we most interact. If I were doing a copyright notice that I cared about, I would actually add this information here at the bottom. You want people to contact you. So when you create a copyrighted work that where you actually expect other people to take an interest in it, and you want to put a copyright notice on there, I would recommend that you also provide a way for them to contact you, so that they will contact you, because that's what you want them to do. Oftentimes you'd just like to know that someone is going to use your work, or maybe you want to establish conditions upon which they can use your work in a particular capacity. But I always encourage people to bring forward this kind of language, to create a point of contact. Maybe you wouldn't choose your UMich address because you think I won't always be at the University of Michigan. So you might pick your Hotmail address or your Gmail address or whatever. But I do encourage you to consider that when you create your own copyright notices. All right, let's take a look at a few things and compare them. So there's the Mona Lisa and the Monica Lisa, or the 9/11 Commission report, which I actually read, don't bother, and a text that you're sending to your friend. Say, let's compare those two things. Or we might compare an amazing idea you have for a web page, something that will make millions of dollars, of tremendous import to you, this idea for the web page that you have, or this web page we have at the University of Michigan now, the Middle English Dictionary. It contains all the words for Middle English. You search for the word comes up. You search for a translation of the word will come up. Every word in recorded history from Middle English is in this dictionary. It took 2 faculty members a lifetime to create it, but in the end, all it is this list. It's just a long list of words that you can search, as compared to this amazing idea you have to make millions of dollars. You could compare what I am saying to the notes that I can see that you are feverishly taking while I'm speaking here. Compare those 2 things in your head, if you would. Or maybe you could compare the Guggenheim Museum to my niece's drawing. So you know the Guggenheim Museum, I love that museum. It's in New York, and there are really no stairs. It's a spiral. I mean, I think there are stairs, but there's a spiral. You walk down the spiral to see the art, and as a child, I had fantasies of skateboarding down that. So when you look at these things, we have these 2 lists. We have these 2 lists of things here, 2 columns of things. And what's interesting to note is that none of these things today have copyright protection. None of them do. All of these things have copyright protection today. And at least for some of them, you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a second. Some of these things are they're incomparable. Some of these things took a tremendous amount to create, and others seemed very simple. Or some of these are very intellectual, and others are unsophisticated at all. Well, I'm here to tell you that our assumptions about how copyright works do not always graft on well. Copyright does not protect you because you worked hard. The fact that you worked hard does not matter. You may be saying to yourself, oh, but this is intellectual property. So I'm here to tell you that copyright is neither intellectual nor is it property. It is neither of the 2. Intellectual property covers things like copyright, patent, trademark, and trade secret. In all those cases, and I'm not going to go into what those other things are, although we'll touch a little bit on patent in a few moments, but this is not about property. It's not. My grandmother was so proud of me when she heard I was an intellectual property attorney. She thought that was saying something about me, like intellectual, my grandson, the intellectual. Her boyfriend, a guy called Ralph, Ralph just turned 100. When I met him for the first time, Ralph was this cute little guy, and he had big glasses, bigger than Elton John glasses, and he's very, very farsighted. So, you know, he'd blink, and the big owl eyes would blink back at you. And he said to me, hey, listen, Sonny, your grandmother tells me you're an intellectual property attorney. I got some land. I got land out in Antelope Valley, and I'm hoping you can help me. She tells me you're very, very good at this stuff. I said, well, that's not what we're dealing with here. I don't deal with that kind of stuff. I'm not a real estate lawyer. It's not that kind of property. In fact, what I deal with isn't property at all. So when we think about intellectual property, we're not talking about real property like this building or the land it's on. We're not talking about chattels like the chairs you're sitting on or the slide advancer that I have here. This is personal property, chattels. Very, very different than what we're trying to protect with intellectual property. It doesn't require much to create a copyrighted work, and yet not everything gets protected. I mean, for instance, let's do this. Oh, let's try this. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Obama in utero. There it is. There it is, my work. That did not take a lot of effort, not very intellectual either. Nonetheless, this is a copyrighted work right here. That is a copyrighted work. It didn't take much. You saw it. You saw the birth of something, I'm not going to say beautiful. we're going to dabble into how copyright works, how it is that the university and Google could enter into these relationships, and why these kinds of distinctions are important. So my colleague Susan Cornfield and I have given this question to thousands of people. We're trying to get at what the purpose of the perception of the purpose of copyright laws. And I will assure you, only one answer is correct. There's only one right answer here. Only one. Think for yourself. Now, you talked to Melissa last week, and you had a chance to do some reading on this subject. I'm not going to ask you to say it out loud. One, because there's a camera here, and I would never want you to embarrass yourself in perpetuity, and two, because that's not the purpose of this exercise. So, but as you think about this, we can reward authors, we can provide incentives to create and publish works, get them out there, we can advance public learning, or we can provide legal remedies. Like I said, thousands of people we've given this question to. I've done it to rooms full of lawyers, and over all this time, only 3% get it right. That should tell you something. Something should seem off to you that only 3% get it right. Because if they were just guessing and didn't know, we'd be doing a lot better than that. But somehow, there is a perception out there that copyright is about something more, that its fundamental purpose is more than just this. Now, you might be saying to yourself right now, wait a second, how are you right about? How could you possibly be right about that? What's the source of your information? Well, the source of my information here is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the U.S. Constitution. That's a section of the Copyright Act, of the Constitution, excuse me, that tells Congress you are allowed to make laws about a whole variety of things. And in this section, in this clause, this is the progress clause. It's where copyright and patent are born. And what's interesting is that science represents copyright and useful arts represents patent. We spoke differently about things a few hundred years ago. But you'll see these other elements are in there, right? These other elements about promoting authors and inventors. This is in there. It's in the Constitution. But the purpose is to promote progress, to advance learning, to advance society. Think about what this must mean. When the Constitution was drafted, we were a young nation. Actually, I just have to tell you, I just went to Philadelphia, and I went to Independence Hall. What an amazing thing that is. If you've never had a chance to do that, I encourage you to do it. Independence Hall, you can sit inside the building where the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution were drafted. The greatest social experiment in human history took place in a building you can go in today. It's amazing to be in there and to see that space. What? Well, not today, you're right, because the government shut down. But you could go in modern day, and hopefully again soon. That is a good point. So the government shut down, you cannot go in there. But fantastic, very moving when you think about it. I mean, yes, maybe the experiment has not been a complete success. I suppose evidence of not being able to go in there today is evidence of that. But still, very, very moving to be there and to be in that place and to think about what it took to take this great step forward, this enterprising step forward that we would advance our society so. But think about what it was like back then. We were a young nation. We were a young nation trying to do new things. Yet we had all sorts of adversity to face as a young nation. We had to discover how to deal with new peoples and a new immersion of culture from a variety of different countries in a new space. We had to deal with the nations that didn't like the fact that we had been exploring. We were exploring to the west. The idea here was that we wanted to be able to share ideas, to get information out there so we could not have to reinvent the wheel every single time. We wanted to advance this notion of learning because we needed each other. Yes, sure, there was some sense of competition, but at the same time, we needed to work together in order to make progress. We needed the miller to actually be able to mill things, and we needed the shoemaker, the cobbler, to actually be able to make shoes. And so the idea that we would not have to reinvent everything was of tremendous importance to us. This is the backdrop of the Constitution. This is why when we think about this notion of progress, it is of critical importance. We know what the founders were thinking about. Take, for example, you know that phrase, "I've seen farther, for I stood on the shoulders of giants"? You've probably heard that. People attribute it to Schopenhauer, or they attribute it to Newton. It turns out the earliest iteration I can at least find was this guy called Bernard Deschartres. He's the one who said it first. Basically, because I stood on the shoulders of these great men, these great people, I stood on their shoulders, I got to see farther. This is a notion we're all familiar with. The problem is, and I'm sorry to do this to you because I feel like I'm destroying Christmas here, but there are no such things as giants. There are no giants, there are none, they don't exist, they've never existed, there are no giants. It's piles and piles and piles of dwarves that people stand on. And it's true. No one does it alone. None of us do it alone. There is no good idea that you had that you did alone. As smart as you are, no matter how much money you made from this idea or will make from this idea, you did not do it alone. You get the benefit of society. You get the benefit of shared information. Yup, there are people who are smarter than each other. There are two people who can stand in the same spot, and one person will see opportunity where the other does not. But still, we all benefit from this massive pile, iterative pile that took place before us. And this is what the Progress Clause heralds. It's an instrument of free expression, even in curtailing some expression. It's part of what we are trying to accomplish in the country. So you want to have this as a backdrop and not forget it. It's easy to forget because copyright's a bit confusing. So these things are all important, this rewarding authors and providing incentive and promoting providing legal remedies. These are all important elements, but they're elements to achieve this end, this valuable end of promoting progress. And to do this, you and we all have to consider all of the constituents. Since copyright is not designed to benefit just one group, it's designed to benefit everybody. It's a balancing test. And we balance the interests of authors and copyright holders with the interests of publishers and distributors, and the interests of the public and users, you, me. In fact, we're all these things in the modern era. All of us do all of these things. We all publish, we're all authors, we're all users of other people's works. But if we favor one of these groups, or two of these groups, we unbalance achieving our end of promoting progress. And this indeed is what these lawsuits are about. It's really about this imbalance, and we'll continue to talk about that. I hope in the end you will feel that your university has stood up for something of tremendous importance, more than just having digital books, but really about looking at keeping a balance in a system that requires balance to achieve its ends. Let's see if I want to see if I skipped ahead. No, I didn't. Okay, so what is a copyrighted work? Well, a copyrighted work is an original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression. I love that because that's exactly how lawyers talk. It's why people have to pay lawyers who don't work for universities a lot of money to figure out this kind of stuff. So this is what you need, these three elements, this originality element, this work of authorship element, and this fixed in a tangible medium of expression element. This is what you need in order to have a copyright emerge. So for a work to be original, it's really very simple. It's a very, very low threshold. It needs to have not been copied. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be like something else. Vic and I could independently create something that looks very, very similar. There are plenty of cases about independent creation where one author created, say, a song, and another author creates a different song that sounds just like the first author's song. But the second author, author B, gets on the charts with that song. Author A never got on the charts. In fact, that song never went anywhere. So author A sues author B saying, you copied my song, and your song can't have a copyright because mine already does. And author B says, I independently created it. I did not copy your song. My song has its own copyright, and therefore I did not infringe your song when I made my song. I used to see this, I guess, when David Letterman was up against Jay Leno, that you'd hear practically the same joke on both shows. Why? Because the American public has a certain kind of sense of humor. They weren't all that different, the two shows. And so the writers, an event would happen during the day, the writers would comment on it in roughly a similar way. This was independent creation. As long as you've independently created it, not copied what someone else has done, you've met this portion of the standard for originality. The other portion is that there has to be this minimal degree of expressive creativity. It has to be expressive. There has to be something expressive about it, but it has to be this minimal amount. So the white pages are not enough. I mean, because when you think about the white pages, all they are is an alphabetical listing of people who live in a particular geographic location. And it appears in alphabetical order, right? And it's just names and phone numbers and addresses. There's nothing expressive there. Facts are not expressive. Facts are discovered, they're not authored. So you need this expressive authorship, and facts just don't give us that. So the white pages do not have the minimal degree of creativity necessary, including if you stick in your white pages fake names and addresses and phone numbers with the idea of identifying if someone else has copied your phone book. And in fact, this is precisely what happened. And for 70 years, courts said, oh, we'll protect the white pages. And finally, the Supreme Court said in a case, no, the white pages just do not have enough creativity. This is just a very functional thing. It gets no protection. There's nothing expressive in the white pages. However, you're going to find this hard to believe, the yellow pages get protection. There's a whole lot more to them, enough creative elements to them, expressive elements. Maybe it's you have to decide whether to call them lawyers or attorneys, or maybe window dressings or fenestrations, whatever they decide to call things. Maybe it's because they stick that Italian checkerboard pattern by the food. Whatever it is, there's enough in the yellow pages. That's the level of difference we're talking about here. So this first factor, really, really easy to meet that little element there. The second element is that it's a work of authorship. And this is basically, these are the expressive media, right? This is the way in which we engage in expressive activity. And so these are the media that get protected. These are the vessels where authorship takes place. We do this stuff in the academy. I mean, all the kinds of expressive works we have in the academy are here. I suppose one day holographic works will appear there. We'll see some additions to what kinds of works are in here. And this is not necessarily exhaustive, but I think we'll see things like that added. Choreography and architectural works were added later on, for instance. Actually, copyright used to not protect most of this stuff. It protected things like maps at first. It didn't, the idea of protecting some of these types of things, like audiovisual works, of course, we didn't have them, and sculptural works, we just didn't protect that stuff at first. But over time, we've added to the list of the media that we use. So you need this original medium, and it just has to be fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So Obama over here, he's fixed. He's doing just fine, and let's see if we have one of these. I can erase him but he was fixed long enough. In fact, I can't erase him well enough that you won't still be able to remember his presence. And I know there's a bunch of Republicans who feel the same way. But anyway, even if we could absolutely get rid of that, it was fixed long enough. And this standard, again, is very low. All you have to do is to be able to perceive the work. So if it's just a blip on the screen for a second, there have been cases about video games where there's a frame or two that comes up for just a second, and it's created by a process of the game. Does that get protection? Well, it turns out it does. It does get protection because it was up there long enough to be perceived. That's it. Once you have these three elements, you get protection immediately, which means that copyright, it just happens. You don't have to do anything special. It just happens automatically. You don't have to register the work with the Copyright Office. You don't have to put a copyright notice on there. You don't have to publish it. You don't have to send it to yourself in an envelope, a sealed envelope, and put it in your safety deposit box. Still, to this day, not a month goes by that I don't hear from some faculty member who wants to do that. You don't need to do any of that stuff. There are benefits to doing it. You put a copyright notice on there, and it's harder for someone to argue that they weren't aware that it had protection. You publish it, and you've established something about the date. Now, copyright notices are not dispositive. They won't tell you for certain who the copyright holder is, because they happen, anyone can put a copyright notice on there. Even registration is not dispositive. You send it to the Copyright Office, pay I think it's $45 these days, it might be more now, but to get your copyright registered, that is not dispositive. There are plenty of works in the Copyright Office that the same work has been registered by multiple people, or where the work is registered by one person but was actually not authored by that person. So these things are not necessarily dispositive. They can be helpful, but you absolutely do not have to do it. Now, an important thing to note here is that if you register a work, if you register the work with the Copyright Office, prior to the time that someone infringes that work, you would then collect special statutory damages and can get attorney's fees. So there's some value, real value to, if you want to make money from your work, to registering it before the infringement takes place. The problem with registration is, as I said, it's like $45. So in a world where just about everything that you create is copyrightable, you want to think carefully about what it is you want to register with the Copyright Office. I mean, almost everything that you can imagine is going to get copyright protection, including the notes you're taking right now, or if you're emailing someone or texting them. In all likelihood, it has protection. Now, those notes, let's talk about those for a second. If you're taking notes, if you're deciding what to put in those notes, rather than saying exactly what I'm saying, because if you're saying exactly what I'm saying, you're copying, right? It's not, then you wouldn't meet the not copied element. But the fact that you're being inspired to write something down in your notes based on what I'm saying, that'll be yours. It's your interpretation. It's your expression of my expression. Those things will get protection for you. You'll have protection for those for a very long time. And other people get protection, including, for instance, authors and publishers. They get protection too, and it's something we don't want to forget. Despite the fact that authors and publishers are upset with us, we really value the rights that authors and publishers have. They're important rights we want to uphold. You now have a sense of how we get a copyright, but how do you know who holds that copyright? Who is the copyright holder? Well, fortunately, we're really lucky, and we have this default rule which basically says that copyright holders are people who author works. So if you are the author of the work, you're the copyright holder. It's that simple. It's so rare in law to have something that simple. You took the picture, you painted the painting, you typed the note, you scrawled out the image, you created the dance, you designed the building. You are the copyright holder. It's fantastic. It's that simple. Actually, let me just stay on this for one more second here. There is a slight complication to this rule, and that is if you author the work with someone else. So if what's your name? Kate? If Kate and I write a book together, and I write the first chapter, and Kate writes the next 22 chapters, we've decided to write the book together, though. And it doesn't matter whose name goes first. It doesn't matter that my name is in 80-point font and her name is in 4-point font. None of that matters. Kate and I have written this book together, and it's a great book, by the way. And we would be joint copyright holders. We would hold the rights, and these are rights I'll tell you about in a few moments, but we would hold these rights together. They wouldn't be, I would have half the rights, she would have the other half of the rights. Only in the case of profits, if we sold something, we would, as a default, have to split it. Or Vic was part of this too. We have this book where the three of us are rights holders in the book. We would split it into thirds, the profits from the book. But other than that, we would have all the rights. So let's assume that, as an example, we suddenly don't get along anymore. And Vic says, I'm retiring anyway. I forget about the two of you. And I say, you know, I'm just vindictive. I'm a lawyer and mean-spirited and lost my heart in law school. So I'm going to do nasty things too. Kate needs a job and money. She's the one who's really benefiting from the third of our sales. But Vic and I decide, no, we're going to give the book away. We're going to give it away. So Kate's selling our book for $19.95, and we are giving the book away. She still has to give us a third every time, but we can give the book away and diminish her sales. Why? Because we all have all the rights. Unless there's a contract that says something different, the default is that if you create something together, you author it together, it's sort of a whole, recognizable whole. Unless you've decided otherwise, you're all going to have all the rights. This is one of the great complexities for bands, and it's why a lot of bands like to have representation. They like to work with a record company because the record company thinks about all this stuff and just takes the rights away from all of them. But bands have struggled with this for years. You know, the band gets together, they're all inspired and young, and when they get to be about 40, they no longer get along anymore, and their spouses and children are occupying their lives, and so now they split up. And one says, well, I wrote most of this song, and the other says, yes, but I wrote some of this song. And so there ended up being fight, and it turns out the drummer added something too, amazingly enough. So it can be very, very messy with being a joint copyright holder, but realize that they all have all the rights. So, but it's about who created it. Well, there is an exception, of course, because lawyers are involved, and the primary exception is this work for hire exception. It's a terrible term, work for hire. It's confusing. First of all, because we use the term work to describe what gets copyright protection, the work. That's not really what's being described here. Work for hire also, to me, it sounds like, I always think of hiring henchmen or something, mercenaries or something like that. That's not what it is either. Work for hire is regular employment. Regular employment. Like these guys back there, our camera and sound team. They're regular employees at the University of Michigan. I'm a regular employee at the University of Michigan. I have in my ordinary job, I am a lawyer for the university. I get a paycheck, I get benefits, I have an office, I have responsibilities. Regular employees, people you employ, not people you hire, but people you employ, works they author within the scope of their employment are held by the employer, not by the author. So the default rule does not apply when it's your job to create the work. Well, this can be, messy. When we look back in history, how do we know whether the person who authored the painting or the book did it as a work for hire? Was it their job to write the book? Like I've written 40 policies at the university. I have to tell you, I think some of them are beautiful. I worked really hard on those. My name does not appear on them, and I don't hold the rights to them. But I wrote them. I worked very hard to make them work and be effective for the university. But in the end, they are not mine. I can just tell you that I wrote them. Other than that. So there's a difference between when you create it on your own than when you're an employee. Now, it can be still more complicated because independent contractors sound like work for hire, but they're not. For independent contractors, the default rule applies. That is, they authored it on their own. What's an independent contractor? An independent contractor is someone who works for you who's not your employee. So when SI says to one of you, hey, listen, we'll pay you $15 an hour to work on this project to make our website, my hope would be that they would go through university procurement to do that, because procurement at university is procuring your services, knows that they have to negotiate for the rights in the web page you create, because otherwise you will be the copyright holder if there's no contract saying otherwise. Independent contractors apply the default rule. Take this example. So when I was going to get married to my wife, actually to my fiance, because she was not yet my wife, we were talking about the wedding, and I said, you know what, we should have Hugh, my buddy Hugh, take the pictures at the wedding. And she said, why would we want to do that? And I said, well, you know, he takes great pictures. And she said, Hugh should be able to enjoy the wedding like every other guest. That's what she said. What she meant was, we should pay someone an extraordinary amount of money to take pictures. So I acquiesced, and we went and we visited all of these photographers, and we found a photographer that my wife liked. She liked this photographer, and I thought, okay, we can go with this guy. We sat down with him and talked back and forth about his great photography services and all the great photographers he had, and then he shoved over a piece of paper with a number on it, this huge number for taking pictures. And I look at it and I said, listen, I have to tell you, I am a copyright lawyer, and you are going to be taking pictures at my wedding, and I am probably going to want to use those pictures at some point in the future, and I don't want to have to find you. I mean, in all likelihood, you are not going to be a photographer very long. You know, my having to hunt you down and find out what happened when your business doesn't go well, or you decide to marry an heiress and no longer have to work, whatever. We need to work this out so that I will be the copyright holder of all of the images, because you are an independent contractor. It's not a work for hire, even though you are doing work and I am hiring you. It is not a work for hire. You're an independent contractor. So I need our contract to say, ignore the default rule, treat this as a work for hire, you will transfer those works to me. That is what I said to him. And he said, well, I've never done anything like that before. You know, it's important for photographers to maintain their rights over their images. So we went back and forth, and I said, look, it's okay if you use the images, you want to use them to promote yourself. My wife's beautiful. You can use her picture. I don't recommend it using my picture, but you can if you really want to. It's sort of like a, you know, Sean Penn Madonna thing going on. You know, it's just not pretty. But so we go back and forth, and he finally pushes over that piece of paper and says, okay, I'll charge you double to be able to do this. So we did, and I am now the proud copyright holder of the world's worst wedding pictures. They are terrible. They're terrible, terrible pictures. I mean, they're dreadful. They could not have made worse artistic choices. It's out of focus. The cameras weren't held. I mean, I wondered whether they were drinking, honestly. They're terrible pictures. I looked at them the once, and I have not been able to look at them since. And so, but I hold the copyright, but I had to. I had to because he was an independent contractor. He wasn't my employee. People make the mistake of thinking that if they have paid for something, that they hold the copyright, and it's not true. We pay for things all the time where we don't hold the copyright. I go through all of this for you to help you understand how difficult it is for entities like the University of Michigan and Google to make determinations even about who the copyright holder is of the works in their collections. Because There might be a contract out there that says that the publisher holds the rights. There might not be. It turns out we've learned that publishers and authors, they don't keep their contracts. They can't find them when they're looking for them. Maybe they're like you every year at tax time. You just can't find that stuff. But this is many years ago, and often it's publishers that no longer exist, or authors who have died and their heirs are the people you're interacting with. Heirs who didn't know they were heirs to copyrighted works. Why? Because copyrighted works often don't get transferred unless someone is exceedingly famous. They don't get transferred directly. I'm sure if you have had anyone in your family die, my guess is that no one has said, and I leave to you, Kate, the copyright to all of my works, or to my musical collection, or to my doggerel poetry. It's so rare that you will have that. The copyright is often transferred in something called the remainder. People think about that, the remainder. Anything I have not mentioned will go to my wife, or to my children, or to my nieces and nephews. That remainder often contains the copyright holder's rights. And people just don't know they have them, and then those people die and they pass their remainder on, and it spreads, and so those 80 people now have rights to this particular work because it's been that many generations and the cousins were prolific. So when we look back, we don't often know who the copyright holder is. The place we start with, the place to start is with the author. That's how you know. So let's take an example. I'm guessing none of you know who that person is, other than Vic. Any of you recognize that person? Maybe even Jay recognizes that person. I don't know. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is Pat Schroeder, the former representative of the great state of Colorado. She was the first really viable female candidate for president. Run, Pat, run was her slogan. And Pat, she wrote a book. This book is called 24 Years of Housework and the Place is Still a Mess, My Life in Politics, by Pat Schroeder. It's, here she is in front of you can see her, she's in front of the Capitol building there. Pat was president of the Association of American Publishers, who sued Google, one of Google's plaintiffs. They sued Google in 2005 is when they sued Google. The AAP sued Google, and she was president then. She had left politics. I love this book. I found it because she was president of the AAP. She had said one day, I had heard she had said, I didn't hear her say this, but I had heard she had said that the library is the enemy of the publisher. What do you suppose she means by that, if indeed she said it? What do you think she means by that? What could she possibly mean? Libraries what? Libraries are giving books out for free. They're lending books for free. So the implication is? Right, so the publisher's not selling a copy because there's a library there. That is probably the primary meaning. Then there's the secondary concern that she might have had, which is that libraries are partnering with Google and digitizing works. So these two big concerns maybe that she had. Now, I have not been able to confirm. I've heard this, I don't know, several hundred times that she said it, but I have yet to be able to find it. But I went looking for it. I thought, I want to find this quote because I think it's ridiculous. Libraries are the best customers that publishers have. Our library spent $25 million last year on acquisitions. $25 million just on acquiring books and electronic licenses to access copyrighted works from publishers. Libraries are the publishers' best customers, hands down. We're the people who buy the books no one else buys. When they do a print run of 600 copies, most of those 600 copy sales go to libraries. They're not to individuals. Now, that's not true when it comes to books that are, popular books like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The libraries are not the bulk of it. But for most of the books that most publishers publish, it's libraries who buy those books. So I didn't understand that. So I thought, I got to find out where that quote is. So what did I do? I went to Google Book Search and I searched for Pat Schroeder and library. And what I found was that it appeared in this book. And then I went to, because I couldn't look any more than my little snippets. So then I went to Amazon and I did search inside the book, and I discovered that she met her husband in a library. And I was shocked. I was shocked that she could say such disparaging things about the library in that context. So I went out and I bought this book. $24.95 retail. $24.95. I bought it for $1 from Abe Books. At that point, I couldn't buy it new. It wasn't available for sale any longer. I mean, I think it just had this print run. Maybe it had two, but it did not have a lot of print runs. And so it wasn't easy for me to get. So I just bought it. It's great. And I have to say, I commend it to you. It's a good book. And when I talked to Pat Schroeder, I just had a brief encounter with her. I asked her if she wrote the book. She said she wrote the book. So she did the writing in this book. Oh, look, here's her on the back with an eagle. Very, very patriotic. But she wrote the book. So who owns this? Does Pat might own it? Who else? Yeah, right. Me, I own it. It's a book. It's a chattel. Right, I own it. You're exactly right. It's a trick question, right? You thought I was asking something else, and that's fair. Don't show her face on the camera. It was just a trick. So I own this book. I bought it. I bought it from Abe Books. I told you that. It's mine. It's my chattel. I paid $1. It's great. I love it. It's my favorite prop. So Pat wrote the book. This book, though, contains deeply personal things. Observations about Pat's life, ideas, facts about her life that we would not know but for the fact that she wrote them down and put them into this wonderful book. Who owns those facts and ideas that Pat shares with us here? What? No one. That's right. You can't, particularly with copyright, own facts and ideas. Facts, they're just discovered things. Facts are truths. Now, you know, which fact is a true fact and which fact is not a true fact. You could debate about that, but facts are not authored. Right? I suppose you can make facts up, but they're not really expressive authorship. We can't own facts. And ideas, imagine if we locked up ideas. If we tried to protect ideas, we would not enjoy ourselves at the movies. I mean, take, for example, boy meets girl. And when they meet, there is absolutely no chemistry. In fact, they hate each other immediately. And then they part after a few barbs and quips, and then later on they bump into each other again and confirm their animosity. They do not belong in the same scene together at all. And then they meet for a third time, and whatever it was that repelled them previously suddenly becomes a source of attraction. And then we see them eating together and laughing together and introducing each other to their friends in all sorts of seasons, and then whatever it was that was the source of that original lack of chemistry emerges again, and they come apart, and then at the end of the movie they come back together, and it stars Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, and it takes place in a post office, or it takes place in the top of a building, or whatever. You know, we've heard this story a zillion times. Imagine if we couldn't tell that story over and over and over again. The romantic comedy would be done. We wouldn't have it. We need to be able to express similar ideas. In fact, the same idea over and over again. Copyright does not protect ideas and facts. There's some protection of ideas that you can get from patents. Some, but patents are tough to get. Maybe not as tough as they should be, but they're still tough to get. Copyright, I already told you, just happens automatically. So we don't want to lock that stuff up. So all the great ideas in this book all the fantastic facts that are in here, in these pages, these don't get protection. Who holds the copyright to this book? What'd you say? Publisher? Other options? Pat. Yeah, Pat. It turns out Pat's powerful. She negotiated with her publisher, and I can go to the copyright notice page where it says 24 years of housework and the place is still a mess. Copyright 1998 by Pat Schroeder. Pat Schroeder at least purports to hold the copyright. I know she holds the copyright because I talked to her, and she said she did, and I believe her. So Pat Schroeder holds the copyright to this book, which is very different than owning the facts or owning the copy. Two all very, very different things. So because she's the copyright holder, she gets these important rights. And these are fantastic rights that copyright holders get. They're actually 6.5 rights, but I condensed them to 5 for our purposes. Here are the 5 basic rights. The right to reproduce the work, to copy it, to make copies of the work. When you're copying the work, you are invoking this important 106 right. It's a fantastic right that copyright holders have. The second is the right to make derivative works. Now, derivative works are things like second editions or translations. You could teach a whole semester course on derivative works. It's very complicated stuff, derivative works. But you want to think about a derivative work as adding some other expressive elements where you still recognize the original. So we could make, for instance, 24 years of housework and the place is still a mess, the musical, where they're singing and dancing, like dancing eagles, jumping, running across the stage, all that kind of stuff. Could be libraries falling down, whatever it is, right in the middle of our fantastic production of 24 years of housework. That would be a derivative work. It's complicated. We won't go too deeply into it, but I just want you to be aware of what they are. Then there's distribution rights, to be able to distribute copies of the work. We're going to come back to this one in a little bit, but it's important to be able to loan or gift or sell copies of a copyrighted work. A fantastic right if you're a copyright holder. And then the ability to publicly perform or publicly display the work. This is lots of revenue, lots of reward for authors, lots of incentive to distribute, lots of opportunity to enforce the copyright right here in these rights. And these rights ultimately are supposed to serve promoting progress. These are valuable rights, rights we should respect, and that I think we do respect. Authors and publishers, I think, don't realize how much librarians actually care about this stuff, but they do. So these are the copyright holders' rights. And those rights, they last a really, really long time. Here's what I'm going to do. It's 10:20. Why don't we just take 10 minutes? Is that what you? Yep. So we'll talk about this slide when we get back. All right? I just think I'm going to let people go to the bathroom because I love the sound of my own voice, but no, I'm good. I have never had a cup of coffee. Never. Yeah, I've tasted it. I don't care for it. I've never had a cup. I've had a sip, but I don't like it.
Someone who agrees with you. Yay.
Okay. Well, anyway. So but fall break it's here, and I'm expecting it's here to stay. So, thinking about here to stay, those rights that you get as a copyright holder, they last for a very long time, as you can see from this slide that's been up. If you're the default rule author, the copyright lasts for the lifetime of the author plus 70 years. 70 years. 70 years after you die, the notes that you are taking today will enter the public domain. They will rise into the public domain 70 years after your death. And you should know that your heirs and their heirs and maybe even their heirs will have the benefit of being the copyright holder of your lovely unpublished works, as well as your published works. But they will have these wonderful rights. If the work you have authored is in the scope of your employment, that is, it's a work for hire, then it'll be 95 years from publication or 120 years if it were never published. So a very, very long time. How long? So my kids would be very unhappy with me if they saw I was using this picture because it's several years old. And they're now getting to the stage where they're actually vain. So, Max and Ruby are sitting in a chair right there, and they're not named after the rabbits. But let's think about copyright and the term in terms of their lives. So let's take Ruby, for instance, and for purposes of this story, let's imagine that everyone in this story lives an average age and has children at an average age. So let's say that at the moment that Ruby is born, so too is a book from an author. And we'll say the author's in the middle of his average life when he authors the book. So the book is birthed, my daughter is birthed, and at the same exact moment. Here we go. We're starting two lines. Ruby will not be able to use that book that is birthed at the same moment that she is, unfettered by copyright, for her entire life. For her whole life, that book will be encumbered by copyright. In fact, if Ruby has a daughter herself, making me a grandfather, wow. If that happens, then Ruby's granddaughter, my granddaughter, Ruby's daughter, will not be able to use that book for her entire life if everyone lives to an average age and everyone dies at an average age. Moreover, if Ruby's daughter has a daughter, she will not be able to use that book for the abundance of her life because it will be fettered by copyright. It will be encumbered. She'll be able to use it, but only encumbered by copyright. And Ruby has a living mother and a living grandmother, and until last year had a living great-grandmother. 6 generations of women who don't or didn't get to use the same work unfettered by copyright. It's quite a burden if you think about the length of time we're talking about locking up works that get protection for the purpose of promoting progress. It's a very, very long time. The good news is that once a work rises into the public domain, there it stays forever unless Congress comes back, as it has done recently, and change the rules a little bit. And there is a swath, which I'm not going to go into here, a very small swath of works that were in the public domain that were now actually brought back to get a little bit more protection. But overwhelmingly, once a work's in the public domain, there it will stay. Works, for your purposes, any work that was created before, authored before 1923 is in the public domain in the United States. Post-23, there are plenty of works, post-22, excuse me, there are plenty of works that are in the public domain, but the easy line is the 22, 23 line. Google uses a more conservative line than that, and as Melissa talked to you about, making determinations about the status of a work is expensive and difficult, but once you're able to determine it's in the public domain, and a work post-23 can be in the public domain for a variety of reasons, including that it wasn't re-registered at a time it was supposed to be registered, or it didn't include a copyright notice at a time that it was supposed to include a copyright notice, but you remember I told you copyright notices are no longer necessary. So it can be a bit of a web. I have a book this thick which helps you make determinations about whether a work is in the public domain. That's the only thing that book is for. It's very complicated, very messy, and expensive. But that 22, 23 line is a good one for us. So when you want to use someone's work, there are ways that you can be pretty confident that it's not going to be an infringement. For instance, if it's a work you hold the copyright to, you can use it. Or if you've got permission from the copyright holder, you can use the work. If the work you are using is not copyrightable, or it's in the public domain, you can use it. So the white pages, you can use them, or it's lapsed into the public domain over time because it's, say, for example, a work of Shakespeare. You can use these books without fear of infringing. It's also possible that the work you're using the use you're making of that work is a use that falls within the Copyright Act outside the copyright holder's rights, like fair use, which is Section 107 of the Copyright Act. Now, I say this to you, but there are people who disagree. So I'm showing you faces here of people because I actually want you to see who these people are, because they're human beings too. Oftentimes we refer to people, we don't give you a chance to see that these are people with perspectives and trying to do something they think is important. So this, anyone recognize this guy? That is Scott Turow, famous author. He's written lots of books and sold many, many copies. The first book I read of his was a book called 1L, which was all about going to law school. And I really liked the book. Anyway, Turow is the president of the Authors Guild. The Authors Guild, he wasn't president of the Authors Guild when the Authors Guild sued Google back in 2005, but he was president of the Authors Guild when the Authors Guild sued Michigan in 2011. So he's president of the Authors Guild. This is Paul Aiken, who's been kind of a lead person at the Authors Guild throughout all of this process, and that's Jan Constantine, my counterpart at the Authors Guild. She's their in-house counsel, and I know her, and she's a delightful person. And so these folks are saying to you, what I have just said to you is nonsense. They say, look, the message is clear, everyone. The message is clear. You're all familiar with this. You've seen this a lot. If you've ever watched a movie on a home video or on demand or however you're watching them these days. And I will tell you, I've actually contacted the Copyright Office, and I can't get them to confirm that they wrote this. This is their sort of notice, their symbol, but I can't get anyone to tell me for certain that the FBI actually wrote this. But maybe they did. But we see it all over the place. We're very familiar with this. So it's not surprising when you see this that plaintiffs would say, Bernard doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Or Michigan doesn't know what it's talking about, right? They will tell you the Copyright Act gives copyright holders rights. Copyright holders' rights. They get rights. Notwithstanding sections 107 through 122, the owner of copyright under this title has the exclusive right to make and to authorize all uses, including the following. And the following are those uses that I told you about, those 6.5 uses condensed to 5, right? Let's go back and look at that language. I went forward, though, actually, because I just printed the slide twice. Notwithstanding. What does that mean, notwithstanding? What does notwithstanding mean? Ladies and gentlemen, your University of Michigan. What does it mean to you? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This is basically ignoring what's said, outside of what's said in those areas.
Right. Despite, right? Despite. Ignoring, right? Despite sections 107 through 122, despite them, the owner of copyright under this title has the exclusive right to make and authorize all uses, including the following. That's pretty powerful stuff, actually, when you think about it. Here's the problem. This is not what the Copyright Act says. I made this up. This is language that I made up because this is how the American public views copyright law. What copyright actually says is subject to sections 107 through 122. The owner of copyright under this title has the exclusive rights to do and authorize any of the following. Look, I want to compare this. I want you to be able to compare these things. I'm sorry you won't be able to read the red very well in this light, but it's not notwithstanding, it's subject to, which means that the copyright holder's rights operate in deference to the rights of the public, which are put into sections 107 through 122. These are rights of the public. These uses are non-infringing uses. They aren't excused uses. They aren't exceptions. These uses carve away from the rights the copyright holder has. It isn't that the copyright holder had the right and your action is excused. It's that the copyright holder never had the right to authorize a use you make if it falls within sections 107 through 122. The owner of copyright under this title has the exclusive rights, still exclusive rights, to do and to authorize any of the following, not all uses, but only those 6.5 condensed to 5 uses that I showed you. They don't get to do everything. The public is confused by this. Why? Well, partially it's because they constantly see this stuff, right? Excuse me, right? We see this all the time. We see it over and over and over again. We can't help but succumb to this notion that copyright is operating like other things. Look, I mean, take this book, for instance. We can go into the book. Let me read this to you. Right on the copyright notice here. So this is Pat Schroeder, who was president of the AAP, right? 24 years of housework and the place is still a mess. Copyright 1998 by Pat Schroeder, all rights reserved, printed in the United States of America. This is in the copyright section, the copyright paragraph here. Okay, here's the good part. Listen carefully to this. This is my favorite part. No part of this book may be used or copied in any manner whatsoever. No part of this book may be used or copied in any manner whatsoever without written permission, except in the case of reprints in the context of reviews. I can't use this book. What am I supposed to do with it? It's just not true. It's not true, but we see it all the time. And it's why only 3% get that question right, because everyone is so focused on infringement. The most popular answer, by the way, is of that A through D, is D. Most people lean towards infringement as being the thing that they think is the purpose, to create a mechanism for enforcement. It was never intended that copyright encompass all uses. Their uses for the public, their uses for the copyright holder. We all get benefits. Isograms are words for which there are no repeated letters. You don't repeat any letter in an isogram. And I stumbled upon this. I haven't been able to find anything longer. The longest English word I can find with no repeated letters turns out to be uncopyrightable, which I thought was kind of funny, if you think about it. But you can't copyright facts and ideas. Why? Because these are not authored, really. You can copy the expression, how we talk about facts, how we talk about ideas, but you can't copyright the fact or idea itself. We both can talk about the same facts. We can talk about the same ideas. We can do so in our own expressive authorship. I can't necessarily use yours, or even in some instances I can. Processes, methods, systems, these things are the purview of patent. They don't get protection under copyright law. Recipes, you could go into a bookstore, almost a thing of the past. You could go into the bookstore, go to the recipe section, the recipe book section, and you could pick out chocolate chip cookie recipes. And you could write down those chocolate chip cookie recipes, and we could make Vic's class chocolate chip recipe book and sell it. We could sell it. If we were acting with academic prudence, we would acknowledge our sources. Although it's not required that we do so under law. Plagiarism and copyright are two different things. Plagiarism is an academic and journalistic principle. Copyright is a law. So we could copy down those recipes because they're processes, they're instructions, they're functional, they're not expressive. You can't copy the stuff like in Martha Stewart's book that says wake up at 3 a.m. and crush your nutmeg, with a mortar and pestle, and that's a good thing. You can't do that part, but you can do 3 cups of flour, 4 eggs, a half a bottle of vanilla. I really like the vanilla. You can do all of that, the order you're supposed to do it, the heat, because it's not expressive. Those things just don't get protection. Government documents, documents of the federal government do not get protection. If it's authored by a federal government employee, it does not get protection. The fact that it was funded by the federal government does not mean that it gets protection. In fact, that the government would be the copyright holder. So there is no, essentially the government, works developed by the government, written by the government, by government employees do not get protection. Unoriginal works like the phone book, works that have risen into the public domain, and then, this is almost a non sequitur, and I should really not use this anymore, but uses outside the copyright holder's rights, the uses we make that aren't within the copyright holder's rights, they don't get copyright protection. It's not so much that they're uncopyrightable, but they just don't get copyright protection. The copyright holder doesn't get to enforce those uses. They don't get to govern those uses. You don't have to ask for permission when you make a fair use. You don't have to ask for permission when you buy a used book. So copyright holders get some rights, not all rights. We talked about fair use. I want to go over this a little bit with you before we talk a little bit more about the HathiTrust case. It's designed to be, fair use is designed to be a pressure valve. It's designed to be an instrument of achieving the ends of copyright. Unlike sections 108 through 122, this is 107, this is a generalized section. And it has 4 factors that the judges have to consider in achieving the purpose of copyright. Are we achieving the ends? Are we benefiting the public? Are we unnecessarily harming a copyright holder? This is the pattern we look at. So the judges have to weigh these factors. The first factor is the purpose and character of the use. It's looking at the use. If the use is more a private use or an educational use or a research use or something called a transformative use, which I'll come back to in a few minutes, those uses are more likely to be fair uses. If the use is a commercial for-profit use, it's less likely to be a fair use. If the second factor is the nature of the work. This isn't looking at the use, it's looking at the kind of work that it is. If the work is a more creative work, artistic work, poetry, that kind of thing, it gets more protection from copyright. So if you're making use of a creative work, there is less protection, and so it's less likely to be a fair use. But if the work you are using is more factually based, it's more of a fact-based work, that is more likely to be a fair use. Because remember, copyright doesn't really protect facts all that well. And so these works tend to, if that work itself, the first thing is about use, the second thing is about the work. The third is about the amount that you use. And in the traditional fair use analysis, if you are using less of a work, it's more likely that your use is non-infringing. It's a fair use. If you are using more of the work or the heart of the work, even if you're using a little bit, but you're using a part that undermines using the rest of the work, well, then it's less likely to be a fair use. Finally, and trickiest in some ways, is the market for the work. If the use you are making harms the market for the original work, it's less likely to be a fair use. If the use you're making does not harm the original market for the work, the more likely it is to be fair use. This is tricky. This fourth factor is tricky because it's a bit self-referential. The reason I say that is because think about it this way. If the use you are making is a fair use, the copyright holder was never entitled to that market. If the use you are making is a fair use, it falls outside a copyright holder's rights. It is statutorily non-infringing. It is carved out of the 106 rights. The market never existed for that work. But to determine whether or not it is a fair use, you have to consider the market for the work. So it's a bit tricky to look at how that plays out. What courts typically do is they decide what's fair and they apply the factors. So the cases are all over the place. I mean, I've read hundreds of fair use cases. It's very tricky stuff. The strongest factors are the first and fourth factors. They tend to weigh most heavily in the judge's minds. There are cases where these factors, like the amount used, is relevant. The nature of the work sort of comes up the least as being a strong factor. There are a few cases where it's been really fun to watch the judges dance around whether the work is creative or factual. These cases involve things like biblical texts. And it's fun to watch the court try to, wonder whether the Word of God is a fact or is it someone's creation? Is it, a fictional work? So that's sort of humorous. But these are the factors that the courts consider. Now, I mentioned this transformativeness because this is a newer doctrine and it affects all the other factors. If the use you are making of a work, when you're thinking about the use, the first factor, if the use you are making is a use that is outside the scope of the traditional uses of that work, if you're using it in a way that it was never intended to be used, for instance, like digitizing it so you can search over it, which this was never intended to do. If your use is a transformative use and you're bringing a whole new way of using these works that's beneficial to the public forward, then it affects the analysis of these other three. That is, if you needed to use the whole work in order to achieve the transformative purpose, then, or a large portion of the work, then this factor loses its weight. If the use you are making doesn't really care about the factual or creative aspects of the work, rather to make the transformation, if it's treating them similarly and it isn't really a factor, again, the second factor is really undermined significantly in terms of its weight. And you can see this in the pleadings in the HathiTrust lawsuit, the suit against the university, where you got to read the outcome of that decision. You can see it, neither party, the defendants or the plaintiffs, spend much time on these two factors. They're the simpler factors too, but when we're talking about transformative uses, as we are in this case, those factors just have less weight. So it's a balancing test. It's how are you using the work? What's the purpose of how you're using it? What kind of work is it? How much did you use? And how is this harming the copyright holder? Those are the questions the court has to ask, and they ask it all with the backdrop of how is this benefiting society? How is this advancing progress? So it's a very messy set. It's not predictable. It's why I said to you before, copyright lawyers who don't work for universities, they make lots of money because we don't know how it's going to come out when we're thinking about making a fair use. It requires a tremendous amount of time and effort to decide exactly how you want it to look. I just, I think I've got, I guess I get to go through this twice. I don't know, they got doubled up somehow. We'll just cruise ahead here. But while we're doing that, questions or comments about how copyright works? Because I have a slide that's supposed to say questions or comments, and I'm assuming I'm getting to that in a second. Sorry, this was a little longer than I expected, but no questions? You feel like you understand it all? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's later, but I'm wondering like how much variation internationally is there in the way copyright is conceived? Is this pretty much the way it works?
No, there's tremendous variation. There is tremendous variation internationally. Most other places do not have fair use, for instance. So the uses that the university relies on to do the HathiTrust case, to do the HathiTrust activities, these are not necessarily possible in many jurisdictions. because this idea of the rights of the public to make certain uses, particularly expressive uses, are prohibited. You have to remember, as I said before, that copyright here is deeply tied to the objectives of the First Amendment. And there are, frankly, not a lot of other jurisdictions that place as much credence and strength in this idea of individual expression as we do in the United States. The First Amendment is so fundamental to how we think about our individualism and how we think about the importance of society working. Without fair use in the Copyright Act and those sections 108 through 122, we wouldn't be able to achieve our ends without running into problems with the First Amendment. We wouldn't be able to offer protection to copyrighted works. If you think about it, because copyright limits your ability to express something. You want to say what someone else said. It's speech in many ways. And we create limits about your ability to do that expression. And so the challenge is that we have to do so in a way that enables people to create works and feel good about creating them and dedicating time, sometimes countless hours. You know, not everybody's creative works are like Obama in utero, right? Many people spend thousands of hours creating very important works and need there to be a mechanism to live and to support themselves in order to be able to do that. At the same time, we need for society to be able to make some uses of those works, even without the permission. In fact, over the objection of the copyright holder. We are a society that needs to be able to parody people. We need to be able to make fun of them. When Two Live Crew did their own version of Pretty Woman and went to the estate of Roy Orbison and they said, no way do we want you characters doing our beloved Roy's song. They said, well, we're doing it anyway because that's a song that we should be making fun of because it's this sickeningly sweet, cloying song about something stupid, some guy walking down the street and falls in love with a woman just because she's walking down the street. Isn't that a stupid thing? And they sing about how she's a big hairy woman and she looks like Cousin It. And they're making a lot of fun of that. Now the estate didn't want that, but we say, yes, you need to be able to use elements of that song to create a derivative work so you can make fun of it precisely because the Orbison estate would object to it. So that was a long way of saying the rules are very different in other countries, and for important reasons. We don't protect databases here. They protect databases in Europe. So the data that you create based on research, these are just facts, and the facts that you've put all those facts in a particular place, not to be read, but to be manipulated for a functional purpose, we don't protect that. In Europe they do. In Europe they also have moral rights. That is, and this would be very antithetical to the way we think about things in the United States often. We don't want people making fun of, in Europe, we don't want people making fun of our work. It's not okay to hang our painting upside down. It is not okay to sing about the big hairy woman instead of singing about the pretty woman because you've criticized the song in a way that's not permissible. You've affronted the author and the work of art. And it's just a different perspective. I think we come from a culture here of rejecting authority, individualism, and poking fun. I mean, the Tammany Tiger was a big deal. You know, the idea that we made fun of Tammany Hall and people made cartoons to make fun of how government operated. It was a critical part of our past and just different than other places, so the law is borne out differently. I'll just say one other thing. If you were a member of the Berne Convention, which we are, signatory to the Berne Convention, you have to apply the laws of your sovereignty to everyone else. But the law applies where your feet are. So if someone is infringing the law in Europe, but they're standing in the United States and it's not an infringement here, it's not an infringement. You don't treat it as an infringement. If it's lawful, if it would be lawful in the United States, but you're making the use in Germany, and it's a violation of the law there, then you would treat it under German law. Gets a little trickier with the internet, but for the most part, you look to the place where the actor is. That was long-winded. Yes?
Just wondering, have you read the RIAA satirical thing about the number of songs?
I haven't.
You would like this. It's the brain is a recording device. The act of listening is unauthorized rather than copying to hilarious act. My question was, can you see a future like where New Zealand has decided that there will be no more patents made, where a country will say there will be no more copyrights made?
There are countries that don't have. Yeah.
Like Europe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. There's so much business involved now with it. I mean, there's a real. I mean, right now, for instance, rights holders have pushed Congress to include, which they hadn't previously, to include copyright revenues as part of the domestic revenue. And so I think we're going to see a greater tie. I mean, there is a threat to the efforts of the First Amendment now as a result of that. I don't know. Some people say the technology will make obsolete copyright, that it won't matter, that people will do what they want to. I don't know. I think things will probably swing in one direction and then back in the other. When I think people will recognize that there's value in making sure that artists that we like eat, like they have the opportunity to invest in their performance. I buy even bad albums of the artists that I like because I want them to come back and produce something good. My brother-in-law, I was just in New Zealand, of all places, in the winter, last winter. I was in New Zealand. My brother-in-law was on sabbatical there, and so we went and he has this theory that in popular music that there's no band as opposed to an individual artist. He said there is no band that did its best work after the age of 40. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's his theory, and I'm trying to find examples that prove him wrong. You can help me think about that and email me afterwards. But I think we will want to support artists. We will want a mechanism to have a lot of support for artists. That said, maybe you're right, or maybe what underlies your question is right. Think of all the time you have spent, each of you, blogging, putting something up for no charge, for free. You put it up there, putting photos up in a place that were public, putting up information on your webpage just because you wanted it to be out there. Look at all the fan fiction that's out there. No one's getting paid for that fan fiction. In fact, some people are getting sued for their fan fiction. People are actually willing to make extraordinary contributions. Free music, just for the music to happen. Now, that's a luxury. There are also starving artists out there who cannot make ends meet and are working at clerk jobs and loading trucks and working at fast food restaurants just to make enough money to get their art together, and they can't afford the studio time or can't afford the paints or brushes or whatever it is that they need because they have to eat. So, it pulls both ways, and particularly in a society that's so dominated by the idea that we make a lot of money and that it's expensive to live here. And there are other places it's even more expensive to live. Where gas is cheap here compared to most places. So I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. There are arguments for both, but I certainly could envision some sovereign state trying to do that. I don't know. There's a lot of power right now in the entertainment industry. Well, that's good. You know, there are artists I like their concerts bootlegged, and they're happy to have it done. But the reason they don't care is because they've made so much money. Right. They're not the starving artists. They're not, like, I liked a show. It was called, I don't watch much TV, but someone said, oh, you'll like this. You should watch it. It was called Firefly. 14 episodes. Yeah, but they didn't continue it, right? I'll never have it again. Never again. It's, right? It's done. It's done. But because it didn't make enough money, right? It did not make enough money, and that kills things that you like. It kills things that you like and things that you want. So there's some tension. And look, it's true, the music industry, there's a lot. I am confident that I'm looking at a room of people who have used peer-to-peer file sharing, right? I'm not asking you to raise your hands, but I'm just telling you my experience tells me that you have done so. And if you're like your peers at the university now, you are using peer-to-peer file sharing less and more direct download now from these online lockers, and you're using peer-to-peer file sharing more for pornography than you are for music. That's what we know about our students. And I get to call them when there are problems along those lines. But for the most part, we just don't know. People are acting independently. But things, you know, it sort of changes over time how people access information. Sometimes people just access it because they can. Other people say, I'd just rather pay for it and get higher quality. Yeah, we'll see. But it's a good question. It is, you know, undoubtedly a good question. Yeah. It's great. She is one of the copyright rock stars. Fantastic. Yeah.
As I remember, so her suggestion was to try to swing public perception of copyright back to answer C, right? That it's disseminating information to the public. And as I remember, it was kind of short on ways of actually doing that. So I wanted to ask you if you think that's an effective move that needs to happen, and if so, how?
So it is absolutely something that has to happen, and it's happening, and I will tell you how it's happening. It's happening in part because universities like your university were willing to fight to make the uses in the HathiTrust case. That case that you read for today is an example where we filled our briefs, and our amici who supported us filled their briefs with references to this. Things will change as people start to realize that the copyright holder does not have all the rights, that our assumptions are different. Look, it's true. If I were outside your house and I really, really had to go to the bathroom, I am not allowed to break into your house and use your bathroom. In fact, if bad guys are chasing me, remember when you were a kid and there were just bad guys? Well, bad guys are chasing me and I want to get safety. I am not allowed to break into your house, to open your, even if your door is unlocked, I'm not allowed to go in there to seek refuge. I'm not allowed to do that. It's your house. I'm also not allowed to take your pen, just your cheap pen. You give me a pen, I cannot take it. I have violated your rights. The problem is that the public perceives copyright as being like real property and chattels, and it's not like that. We all get to make many, many uses of copyrighted works. Here is a public display. This is a public display. Abe Books engaged in a selling to me. They sold this book to me. Section 109, which is called it's the first sale portion of the Copyright Act, it limits Section 106.3, which is the distribution right. It almost completely eats it. It says if you acquired a copy of a copyrighted work lawfully, essentially this is what it says. And in terms of books, this is exactly what it says. It's a little more complicated with music. But if you acquired a copy lawfully, and lawfully also means picking it up off of a park bench, if you acquired it lawfully, you can make all those uses. You can give it, sell it, loan it. You can do all of those things with that book. When I teach, I could read you the whole book in this room if it was related to our class. Instead, I just read you small portions of it. It's a give and take. It's not all or nothing. And of course, the public doesn't like that, right? They don't like things that are hard and complicated. Why would they when there's an easy way to look at it? If we could just make a decision quickly. But it's very hard to make these decisions. Let me use this as a jumping off point to just talk about the case which you read for today. I want to just give you a little bit of history. And I'm sorry I screwed up the slides. I'm sure that was a total pain for you. Pre-digitization, pre-2002, we're digitizing stuff on our campus like I had told you. Then 2002 comes along, and we start discussing the idea of digitizing our entire collection with Larry Page, our alumnus. Google's interested in digitization, and we want to get stuff digitized. As I told you, we were digitizing more books than anyone else at that time. This was part of our agenda. It's just our agenda was going to take too long. Moreover, Google had this cool technology that we didn't have. Our digitization process was really hard on the books. Their process was fast and cool. What they could do was they'd put the book in a cradle, sitting open, slightly bent, and they had an entire room of people doing this, and they have a camera system that takes pictures, and they step on a pedal or step on a button and turn the page as fast as they can, and turn and step and snap and turn, snap, step, turn, snap, step. As quickly as they can turn those pages and step, that book the pictures are being taken of that book, and it's being digitized. The cool thing that they did was to be able to convert those pictures with the kind of curl of the page. They have an algorithm that straightens it out. And that was the really cool part. Much less damage to these books. In fact, no appreciable damage to the books the way Google used them. Our processes were more invasive. 2004, Michigan is the first to sign a contract. We know because the other institutions all contacted me. They said, oh, your name's on this contract Google showed us. So we know we were the first to sign. There are 4 other institutions, Harvard, Stanford, the New York Public Library, and Oxford, all are the first libraries to partner with Google in this digitization process. They all have roughly similar contracts. Google in 2005, and Google alone, is sued by a group of authors and a group of publishers. They're sued separately. The cases are conjoined in front of Judge Chin. And Judge Chin is to hear their case. The process starts, but then Google and its plaintiffs decide to try to settle their case. And so for several years, there are settlement talks. Over a period of 3 years, there are settlement talks. We're on the sidelines. Every now and then they'd ask us questions. We are participating in the negotiations, but never talking to the other side, almost never talking to Google's plaintiffs to try to work out a good settlement agreement. So they're working on these settlement talks. We start the Hati Trust, which I told you a little bit about, this service of the university where libraries are able to store and curate their digital collections together and to make lawful uses. And the university manages that process, and the libraries work together for the betterment of all, and to make sure the works are protected and preserved. The settlement agreement then comes out, and there are ups and downs. The settlement agreement is opposed to the court. The libraries say, we can live with that settlement agreement. Google and its plaintiffs say, we can all live with it, authors and publishers. And I have to point out, authors and publishers being on the same side is the first time that happened. They hate each other for the most part because they're always fighting with each other. The representations of the authors are saying the publishers don't treat them well. Publishers say authors want too much, and in order for the publishing industry to work, the publishing industry has to be well compensated for its contribution. So everybody's contributing in those two sides, but they fight constantly. It's only Google and its library hybrid that are scary enough and to get them to work together. But the settlement agreement emerges. It's over 300 pages. It's very complicated, and there's a lot of criticism of the settlement. So much so that the Department of Justice comes forward and says, no, you can't do that. You can't have a class action agreement about these sorts of things. So Google and its plaintiffs go back. They produce another settlement agreement, which they present to the judge. The judge reviews it, and he turns it down. He says, this is not a settlement agreement I can approve. I guess the case continues. So the case starts moving forward again. We still have not had any hearing on the merits of the case. Then Michigan announces its Orphan Works Project in 2011, and the Authors Guild then sues Michigan, Cornell, Wisconsin, Indiana, and the University of California system. We all get sued for our participation in HathiTrust, our relationships with Google, and for how we're using the works. The Orphan Works Project, as Melissa may have mentioned in class last week, was a project designed to identify orphan works and make them available to people on campus. Well, the Orphan Works Project never ultimately reached its fruition. We made lots of determinations, some of which were erroneous, so we sort of stumbled out of the gate. We never actually did use any of the work, so we stopped the Orphan Works Project. But the suit continued. The Orphan Works Project probably provoked the lawsuit against us. The suit continued. We ended up in front of Judge Chin. Judge Baer. You got to read Judge Baer's opinion, talking about why it was that the uses the libraries were making were of critical importance, how they were fair uses under Section 121 of the Copyright Act, how plaintiffs may not actually have been able to bring the case, that the uses were transformative, and both transformative and traditional copyrighted uses. We win the case overwhelmingly. That, by the way, the opinion you read is a great opinion. It's a great opinion, not only for us, but really for copyright law. And it talks about that fundamental purpose of copyright law. It's just a very good opinion, well-written opinion. Then Google settles with its publishers, or the publishers settle with Google. Not the authors continue on. And then the authors in 2012 then appeal our lawsuit with them. They appeal the HathiTrust lawsuit. Then in 2013, the Google case, the case against Google from the authors, there's a summary judgment hearing in front of Judge Chin. By the way, Judge Chin has now moved to the Second Circuit. He's been promoted as a judge, but he is still hearing the Google case. So even though the Google case started in 2005, it didn't get heard on summary judgment until after the HathiTrust case, which started in 2011. So our case was started and ended at the trial court in a year. Google, it took 8 years. Although the judge hasn't ruled yet. But Judge Chin heard the summary judgment arguments on both sides. And summary judgment, by the way, is when each side says, or when I make a summary judgment argument, I say, believe the other side's facts. Even if you believe their facts in the places where the facts are relevant and they differ, even where our facts differ, believe them, I still win. That makes sense to you? Believe the other side's facts, the law is still on my side. So both parties say that in Google's case, as they did in our case. And shockingly, Judge Chin, in the course of the hearing with Google and its plaintiffs, seemed to be favoring Google. And we should know pretty soon how he feels about it. We were not expecting him to be favoring Google. He had given all signs of suggesting that Google was actually not going to prevail. I will mention, that, which I don't have on the slide here, but Google and its plaintiffs, Google and its author plaintiffs, did go up to the Second Circuit to try to determine the size of the class. They had a class action lawsuit, and the Second Circuit said, we're not interested in talking about the class. Talk about the copyright first. We'll get to the class later. And so they had a summary judgment case about the same issues, essentially, that were in the HathiTrust case. That is, can you digitize millions of works? Can you make them searchable? Can you show snippets? Although we don't have snippets, Google may prevail on that point. Some differences between their case and our case. They're a commercial entity. We're a non-profit public good. It doesn't make Google not a public good, but it certainly makes it a for-profit company. That might affect the first factor a little bit. If the uses are transformative, though, it won't affect anything at all. And Judge Chin seemed to suggest, and we'll find out for certain, that he felt that the uses were transformative uses that Google was making. So it's quite possible that Google could win and that we could win. We are now up in front of the Second Circuit. with Judge Chin's current peers. We don't know who will hear our case, but on October 30th, we will present our case. Plaintiff said Judge Baer got it wrong at the district court in our case. Judge Baer got it wrong, and that indeed our case should be, his case should be overturned. And we will be in front of a panel of judges on October 30th, talking with them about why the uses we've made are of critical importance. Here's what our uses are. HathiTrust uses. We search, we give access to people who have print disabilities, we have preservation uses. We had talked about doing the Orphan Works project, which failed. We discovered that it failed. We're not doing it anymore. It may be, plaintiffs would say the Orphan Works project was a violation of copyright. We would say it isn't, but it doesn't matter because we're not doing it. We're not doing it because it turns out it's too expensive to get the level of confidence we want in determining what is an orphan work. And again, you may have heard about this from Melissa last time, but it's just too expensive for the yield that we get. We need it to be more accurate, and it's expensive to get that accuracy. Primarily because it's hard to get information about who's the copyright holder. Is it the author? Is it the publisher? Is it some independent contractor? Very difficult over long periods of time. But here are the HathiTrust uses. These are the uses that we're fighting to be able to continue to make. This case made new law. It made new law. It was very clear in talking about fair use and how digitizing works is a fair use, searching over them is a fair use, making them accessible to people with a print disability is fair use, preserving them is a fair use. Fantastic descriptions of this. It's not how many copies you made, it's how you used those copies. I told you plaintiffs talked about us driving trucks up, Google driving trucks up and hauling out millions of copies of books. They wanted this really big image of how that would look. And it's true. What they've said is true. There were trucks, and they took millions of books out of the library. It's true. It's just that there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's absolutely nothing wrong. It's like saying, your epidermis is showing. I can see it. I can see your epidermis right from here, and it is showing. It's the accusation that people are so afraid of, the accusation, and what we said is, yes, we did this. We did this consciously, deliberately, with a purpose, and it's a lawful, non-infringing purpose. Plaintiffs argued that because there are special library uses, there are special uses in the Copyright Act that give libraries opportunities to make uses others don't get to make, that prevents the libraries from making fair uses, that they aren't entitled to make fair uses. This is an amazing argument that plaintiffs came forward with. It was their lead argument. That is, these libraries don't get to make fair uses because the uses they're allowed to make are in Section 108 of the Copyright Act. It's amazing. Section 108 F4 says, nothing in this section shall in any way limit the right of fair use. It says it right there. Plaintiffs said, no, of course it limits fair use. And we said, what about this? And plaintiffs said, no, that doesn't really apply here. But it's plain as day. I mean, they just overlooked it, and they continue to have it be a very strong argument, and maybe it's the argument they would like. They would like libraries to only be able to make uses in Section 108, but of course, there's a lot of Section 107 uses that libraries need to be able to make that are not consistent with regular library works. But we prevailed here, and it's the first time that Section 108 has ever been adjudicated in a lawsuit. Section 121 is also called the Chafee Amendment, and it's about enabling authorized entities to make special uses for people with disabilities. We claimed, accurately so, says the court, that we are an authorized entity as a library. And the court said not only could you make all the uses that you made under Section 107 fair use, but you also could make those uses for people who have print disabilities under Section 121. Again, the first time Section 121 is adjudicated in a lawsuit. And finally, we said that these plaintiffs, the Authors Guild, some of the plaintiffs who sued us aren't even allowed to sue us. You're not even allowed to sue us. You can only sue on behalf of your own works. You can't sue on behalf of other people's works. And the Authors Guild didn't have any works in our library. And the court said, yeah, that's right, the Authors Guild's not allowed to sue you. So plaintiffs ended up worse than they started here. And our hope is that when we get to the Second Circuit, that this is what will that this is what will continue. And with that, I see that it's 11:30, and I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer a couple questions after class if you like. Thanks.